Why have we come to earth? Do you remember? Why have we taken birth? Do you remember?
Good morning. Okay, that's a big charge. Now I got to inspire and empower you to live spiritually fulfilling lives. Gee, pressure's on, right? How are you? Today in the Catholic tradition, which I grew up in, is known as All Saints' Day, and I always like to think of it as the day after you survive Halloween, right? And so everything, all the little ghosts and goblins are gone for the year, and the sun rises, and here we are again. So welcome. We're going to talk today. Today is our last look at Emma Curtis Hopkins' Scientific Christian Mental Practice. We're going to look at the chapter called The Way of Wisdom. There actually is one more chapter after that called The Crown of Glory, which we're not going to directly tap on, but it's kind of the theme of what we'll be doing for the latter part of this year. In some ways, it colors that. And just to give you a heads up what we'll be doing for the rest of this year, for the next 2 weeks, we're going to be looking at the Raymond Charles Barker classic, The Power of Decision. So if you want to get a head start on that, that book is available in the bookstore. And then we'll take a look at gratitude on the week before Thanksgiving. And then beginning the week after Thanksgiving, the Thanksgiving weekend, we're going to play with the idea of Advent. And I love Advent as a spiritual practice because it is a preparation for the birth or rebirth of light in our lives. And so, in case you've never had that experience, there's a couple ways that light can be born in your life. You're completely unconscious, and all of a sudden it goes bang, and it knocks you over. How many have had that kind of an enlightenment experience, right? And so, and you're totally unprepared for it. The gentler way is to be a little more prepared so that as it comes, it becomes more of a dawn rather than a big kaboom in your face. And so we're going to play with the idea of Advent, of preparation. We're actually going to use the Michael Beckwith book, the 40-Day Mind Fast and Soul Feast book, which Sylvia is going to be bringing into the bookstore. She'll have that available right around the Thanksgiving time. So if you want to follow along, doing a group spiritual practice is a very powerful way. So we'll start that on the very last Sunday of November, and then move that into the season. So, and then we'll have a wonderful Christmas Eve season. Do we have a bird in here, or what is that? There's a bird out there. Okay, singing away. So today is The Way of Wisdom with Emma. And I love this opening quote from her. The world will persist in exhibiting before you what you persist in affirming the world is. Let's say it again. The world will persist in exhibiting before you what you persist in affirming the world is. Isn't that the great news and bad news? So Emma talks about judgment. When she talks about judgment, in her case, a couple of weeks ago we did the chapter on righteous judgment. She's talking about this high spiritual judgment, the perception from our highest self. So when she's using this word judgment, that's what she's talking about. Not, I'm going to judge you because of what you're wearing or whatever like that. But it's this high spiritual perception. So she says, judgment is as great and competent as will and meekness can agree. This is the lesson that we're doing. Judgment is as great and competent as will and meekness can agree. And so what we're going to look at in this chapter is this balance of will and meekness. Will and meekness. And so, you got a gentleman waving at you back there. Yeah, there were some birds making a nest right up in here earlier. Anyways, will and meekness. So let's take a look at these two qualities. If you have a strong will, you like to have things go your way, right? And you know people like this? Okay? And this is good if you also have a balance of meekness of character. And a meekness of character is the willingness to listen and let go of your point, yield your point instantly when you see you're wrong or it's not the highest or best. I used to belong to a group of people that when we would meet, we always had this rule in the meeting that said the highest idea wins. Not the person who shouts the loudest or who ranks highest, but the highest thought about whatever we were discussing wins. And it didn't matter who it came from. When Emerson was working in the Transcendental movement, or founding the Transcendental whole segment, he was working with the Hawthorns and the Alcott families and people like that who were very highly educated, oftentimes professors at local colleges, and they met around the table, and his handyman wanted to be in on that conversation, but he was educated, but he wasn't quite as educated as they were, so they said, well, you can sit down the hall. You can listen in. And eventually the handyman kept kind of throwing ideas and questions into this mix, and they finally said, you know what? We think you belong at the table. So they let him in. The handyman's name, by the way, was Henry David Thoreau. Okay? So the highest idea wins. Can I let go of my will or my way or my status or my whatever enough to let in a higher idea if it's there? So our strong will protects us from blindly following somebody else's quick judgment. Our will, when we stand in when we stand in knowing what we know, this is the truth, we don't get swayed this way, that way, this way, that way. We stand in knowing of it. Our meekness guides us along the lines of what she calls truth. Our meekness allows us then to hear the highest and greatest truth. It's like a tree that bends but doesn't break. If it was rigid in the wind, when a strong wind came along, it would just break it off. We've seen trees that are like that. Okay? But a tree that, especially a tree that grows up in an area where there's wind on a regular basis, strong wind, has the quality, develops the quality, evolves the quality of being able to stay strong, but also bend with the wind. So can we do that? I know that Luke is sitting over there going, you can talk about bend but not break defense on football here. So, but it's the same thing. So do we have that? So will without meekness. If I have will but no meekness, okay, it drives me to carry out things my way, right or wrong. You've met people like that, right? It's my way or the highway. I remember back in the 60s and early 70s, there was those signs, America, right or wrong, love it or leave it. We don't care whether we're doing it right. We're America, and we can just do whatever we want, and if you don't like it, get out, kid, you hippie po. That was kind of the attitude back then. Will is just, I'm going to have to do it my way. Period. Meekness, on the other hand, without will, yields to doing what we say we won't do. You might say it's having no backbone, no spine. It's just, whatever comes along, I'll just go with whatever that is. We've met people like that, right? Okay? Just going with whatever is. And what both of those deliver for us, is, if we get too far into them, is the experience of bad judgment. Bad experiences. And Emma goes on to say, nothing discourages a person like seeing the bad judgment that he or she has used. Don't you just hate that? When you look back and go, man, I screwed that up. I messed that up. And I knew better. I hate that. Don't you hate that? That was how I learned to listen to intuition. People say, how did I learn to listen to my intuition? It's you listen to it, you ignore it, and then you go, God, I knew that, and I just didn't do it. That's how you start to first listen to your intuition or learn your intuition. So bad judgment equals one of two things: turning to the way that our best judgment disapproves of. Our best judgment says, I shouldn't do this, or I should be doing this, and I don't instead. This morning my bad judgment says it's a wonderful morning to just lay in bed. Fortunately, my wise judgment said, get up and get going, And a lot of us do that, right? Yes. So we turn out, St. Paul has a phrase that the things that I would do, I do not, and the things that I should not do, I do. Okay, and we've all experienced something like that. So that's when our meekness is kind of running it, and we're not living on our best judgment. The other way of bad judgment is carrying out our own will regardless of everything. So we forget about or ignore our high spiritual truth. We don't bother to pay attention to it. We don't listen to it. And sometimes we even call our vigorous will judgment. God called me to do that. We hear this a lot in certain preachers, in certain kind of circles where they're very self-righteous, and it's not just Christian preachers either. It's like this was this was the right thing to do because God told me to do it, even though it doesn't make any sense. You've met people or heard of people like that, right? Yeah. Some of us have been people like that to some degree, right? Nobody anymore, but you have had that practice in your life once in a while. So, Emma says, things look badly in your affairs, do they? I love that line. She's normally not quite that humorous, but things look badly in your affairs, do they? Do you will them to be bad? No, 1,000 times no. Your will is for good, but your poor will cannot carry the day alone. It has to be married to meekness. You can give birth to the divinest decision by compelling your meekness to unite with your will as to your health, as to your strength, and as to your prosperity. When I take my will and I unite it with that high thought, that spiritual truth, that spiritual knowing within me, I create something that's so powerful that then what happens in my life starts to reflect the highest truth. I have the will to both walk through it, make it happen, but also the meekness to listen and open to the way that Spirit wants to make it happen through me. Okay? So I can do that dance of, yes, I am going to have this happen, and yes, I'm also going to be open to the process that Spirit guides me into. So the word yielding is a word that has gotten a lot of people into trouble. And so oftentimes, especially in our culture, we kind of don't like that yielding word, right? I remember Wayne Dyer talks about watching a person in Michigan merging into their traffic, and there's a yield sign there, and the person comes to a complete stop, and he's yelling at him, and it says yield, not surrender completely, So yielding is oftentimes, especially among spiritual circles that many of us grew up in, interpreted as yielding to suffering for God. Gotta suffer. It's God's will for me to suffer, have a bad life, and I just have to yield to that. Excuse me. Foot nauseous for a moment there. The truth, however, is that is not God's will, right? We teach that is not God's will. What yielding really is about is yielding to what is the highest spiritual truth that wants to be known in this moment. Mary talked about us doing visioning on tomorrow, and we're going to do this on a once-a-month basis. And it's listening to what is the highest spiritual truth that wants to be known. For what we're going to practice with is the center. But once you understand the process, you can use it to practice for your life. What is the highest spiritual truth that needs to be known? And you can use it for anything. What's the highest spiritual truth that needs to be known in my work right now? What is the highest spiritual truth that needs to be known in my relationship right now? What's the highest spiritual truth that needs to be known in my financial situation right now? What's the highest spiritual truth that needs to be known in my anything? The next book to read, I don't know, whatever. We can use it for anything. It's a practice of listening to high spiritual truth. And so, as Michael Beckwith says, what we're yielding to isn't suffering, we're yielding to excellence. We're yielding to the highest and best that's possible for us. That's the meekness that we're invoking, is what is the highest and best, and what can I yield to that is that highest and best for myself? Instead, we oftentimes yield to appearances, what it looks like out there. We yield to our fears, and we yield to our false beliefs. And that's when we get caught up in, that's where we have to have the will to stand and know that spiritual truth. Okay? When we find ourselves yielding to, we look at our checkbook and go, "Ooh, my God," okay? That's the time to sit there and go, "Wait a minute, what is the spiritual truth going on here?" See, a lot of people will sit there and go, "Well, I know what I should do, but, there's this appearance that has come up, and so therefore God or the universe must not want me to." You ever met anybody like that? And the truth of the matter is, no, the universe doesn't have an agenda. It doesn't have a yes or no function. It only says one thing. It says what? Yes. That quote that we started off with, "The world will persist in exhibiting before you what you persist in affirming the world is." So if you insist on affirming that the world is a place that stops you from having what you want, it will show up that way. It'll just say yes. Not because that's its nature, but because that's what we're saying is what we believe that it is. Got it? Okay? So this is the call to stand in our spiritual truth, to know that we live and move and have our being in a bountiful, loving God that would not create us in lack or unhappiness. Which of you would want your children to grow up in lack and unhappiness? None of you. Okay? And so there's no infinite presence that wants that for us. When Jesus talked the story of the prodigal son, the prodigal son goes off, messes up quite a bit, right? Comes back to the father, and the father doesn't sit there and go, "Well, hope you learned something from that, you little whippersnapper. And now you're going to have to work your way back into my favor and prove that I can trust you." Doesn't do that, right? The father, which symbolizes God in this story, runs out, buys some brand new clothes, a new ring, throws a party, and runs down the road to meet the kid and says, "I love you. I'm so glad you're back." Period. We don't live in a God that we have to earn anything from. Okay? God has no agenda for us other than pure love and pure good. Emma goes on to say that there's no material remedy for disease. That means there's nothing that will, on the material level, fight with or cure disease. Okay? Because disease is in a misalignment with spirit, and only spiritual truth will bring us back to that. Because in God, there is no disease. God's not sick, right? God doesn't have any diseases. Right? And so, if we stand in knowing this spiritual truth, it brings us back to the truth of the fact that, and because I'm one with God, neither do I. Ernest Holmes puts it this way, there's nothing to heal, only truth to be revealed. When I stand in knowing that truth, it brings me to a whole new level. So Emma tells us, when you lay your judgment to the line and your righteousness to the plummet of highest truths you have heard, then, says the prophet, your old covenant with death will be annulled and your agreement with hell will not stand. When you stand in that process where you lay your judgment to the line, a line and a plumb bob, she's talking about that, and your righteousness to the plummet of the highest truths you have heard. In other words, if you will stand in that, this is the Confucius quote that we started with, nothing can hurt you. It doesn't mean you won't have experiences, but nothing can hurt you. And you will grow past those. Yesterday I was doing a workshop for the foundations class and a couple of the practitioners on spiritual mind treatment, on doing that. And one of the things that we came back to was having a phrase, having a mantra, or something that reminds us of our spiritual truth as quickly as possible. And one of those is, God is bigger than this. Anything I encounter, God is bigger than this. And it takes me to a place of going, oh, okay, wait, I don't have to solve this, as Einstein would say, at the level of the problem it was created from. I have to resolve this in some other way, and I resolve it by knowing spiritual truth and standing in that spiritual truth. Okay? And so that's what we're being called to do with this. She also goes on to say, we cannot crush out criticism. Have you noticed? There's a critic everywhere, right? Somebody's going to criticize you. However, we can deny the truth of it, and it erases it from our mind. See, when I get criticism, and believe it or not, once in a while in this job I do. It's rare, but once in a big while it happens. And so what I do is I sit there first and I get meek. I listen. Is there truth to this? Is there truth to this? Even if it sounds outrageous, is there some truth to this? Is there something that I need to know? And once I've established what it is and can and separate out the wheat from the chaff, the truth from the non-truth, then I stand in my spiritual truth and go, okay, and the rest of it I'm leaving behind. Because that ain't the truth of me, that's about that other person. Almost every bit of criticism is usually about the person who's doing the criticism, right? Okay? She says, accusations are prejudices against people. Keep the highly efficient judgment, and they keep the highly efficient judgment from speaking. They don't emanate from the one mind. See, God doesn't criticize, does it? Does it? God doesn't criticize. God doesn't look at you and say, you're a flawed, deviant human being. And that color looks terrible on you. It's a phrase a friend of mine used to make in high school. It's like, what was it? Your feet stink, you don't love Jesus, and your mother dresses you funny. It comes out of a book or a TV show. I don't remember what it was, but it was one of those. And so, but God doesn't do that. That's not from the one mind. Okay? And so as we don't accuse also, and that's one of the big things that she works with is don't accuse, because if there's only one of us, who am I accusing? I'm accusing myself, and I'm accusing the infinite. Okay? And so she invites us to stop, to drop doing accusations, and to stop taking criticism personally. This goes back to our 4 agreements, right? Don't take it personally. Listen to it. Is there a truth to it? That's the meekness part. And then use your will to know the truth. So she gives an affirmation to go with this. Evan is always great with affirmations. This is another one of those. And this is one of those that, again, will trouble your mind. Okay, it'll trouble your rational mind. So just take a breath with me, and we'll break this down in a minute. I do not accuse the world or myself of foolishness or ignorance. I am the judgment of God. I know all things and do all things well. So let's take a look at that. I do not accuse the world or myself of foolishness or ignorance. If all there is God ever foolish or ignorant? No. We've seen situations that we think are mistakes, and later on down the road they go, yeah, but that was perfect. It was perfect that it worked out that way, right? And Miles Davis, the great jazz musician, said there are no mistakes in jazz, they're just new lines to riff off of. Okay? So God doesn't care. God doesn't have a mistake consciousness. So I do not accuse the world or myself of foolishness or ignorance. Now sometimes that gets to be challenging, doesn't it? Because our mind wants to say, but that person or that person was really foolish. And especially if it's that person, we carry it around like a ball and chain behind us, right? Oh man, I was so stupid to do that 25 years ago, and I'm still beating myself up about it. But she says, do not do that. I do not accuse the world or myself of foolishness or ignorance. I am the judgment or the clear perception of God. It's not about judging other people. It's about looking at the situation and seeing what is the highest spiritual truth in the situation. I am that judgment. And as such, I know all things and do all things well. How many of you have a little part of you that goes, well, I won't know how to do it? Okay? I might not be able to figure this out. You, of your own, might not be able to. I, of my own, have a whole lot of things that I can't figure out well. But I know that the Spirit within me knows how to do that. And so that's when I turn within. That's the meekness process. So we're balancing out this will and this meekness. So let's practice saying that together if you're willing to. I do not accuse the world or myself of foolishness or ignorance. I am the judgment of God. I know all things and do all things well. Breathe that in. So this week for our spiritual practice, we're going to do 2 things. Normally I do 3, but just it's a light week, okay? We'll be gentle this week. Number 1, assess your balance of will and meekness. Just notice how you operate in your life. Are you a person who really, really needs to have your way at all costs, no matter what? Or are you a person who gets washed all over the place and does whatever other people want you to do? or whatever the circumstance or your mood or your whim sort of dictates to you? Or are you more balanced than that? Do I have to have my way? Do I give up to others or appearances easily? And sometimes it's like in certain areas, my will is good, but maybe I get a certain set of appearances. I get a diagnosis. I get a checkbook thing. I get my lover does something, and I get into a response about that, and I yield to and let those appearances turn me around to have some sort of a feeling that is not my highest and greatest truth. Okay, so just noticing where you're at, just noticing, and again, remember our number one rule: no sledgehammers to the self. Okay. No stoning yourself about, just notice that you do this, okay? Then number 2 is start to build a balance. If you notice that you need to strengthen your meekness, practice listening to the Spirit within. If you're a person who normally has to have your way, my way or the highway, I got to have it, practice listening to the Spirit within. Practice in a way softening, getting a little bit softer. Practice with meditation, practice with visioning. Visioning is a great way to practice that listening to the Spirit within, to strengthen our meekness. When I was talking to the Practitioner 2 class, we're learning how to work with clients, with patients, with people that we're seeing in that process. And we learn to both listen to what the person is saying, and at the same time being listening to Spirit about what I'm hearing and what's happening in front of me. So can I listen to Spirit? Can I listen to Spirit in the face of, as I look at the checkbook, or as I look at the diagnosis, or as I have this interaction with my boss or my lover, can I listen to Spirit at the same time? On the other hand, if you need to strengthen the will, then listen to what I know to be right. You've all been around this teaching enough, even if it's your second or third week here, that you get a sense of what we're teaching here. And we all have an inner guide that says, I know what's right. If you've come to this church and you came back a second time, something about this place resonated with you, and what it did was it resonated with your inner truth of who you know yourself to be and how you know the world to be and what you know God to be. So you listen to what I know to be right, and I practice standing in that. I practice standing in that. And one of the ways I can do that is to say no when I mean no, and to say yes when I mean yes, and to mean what it is that I say about either one of those. A lot of times when we're stuck in our meekness, we don't know how to say no, right? Or we don't know how to say yes when we really mean yes and really mean it. So that's your homework this week. Just notice where you're at, and then build up in any place that you're out of balance with it. Are we good for that? Yes. Great. So I want to close with a final quote from here, from Emma. Confidence or faith is a life principle. Always, after taking a premise, there comes a time when it seems as if it would not work after all. Paul said, stand, and having done all, stand. What she's saying is that any time, and you've probably noticed this, anytime, especially if you take a big step in your life and you start to go for something, there comes a point where it seems like it's not going to work out, right? We get scared. Anybody besides me ever notice this? Okay? And what she says is, you keep going, you stand in that right premise, you stand in that truth. You do what is yours to do, and when you've done everything that is yours to do, then you stand in the truth as you know it. You stand in that highest truth. And you allow whatever needs to happen, and you don't have to make it happen. So that's our quote. That's what I invite you to do this week. So let's move into prayer. And so in this prayer, we first open to Spirit. We first get meek. We open to that love. We open to that wisdom. We open to that voice within us that knows the highest and greatest truth. We take a breath and we listen to that. We remember the truth of God, Spirit, the universe, the Tao, whatever name we give it. We remember that truth, that it is pure love, pure wholeness, the pure life energy, the pure abundant good. It is that already. That is the truth of what Spirit is. It is health, it is wholeness, it is life energy, it is vitality, it is power, it is grace, beauty, creativity. It is this already. That is the nature of the divine. And because it is infinite, I am one of it. And therefore, I am already one of the health, the creativity, the love, the glory, the great good of the divine. I am that. I am that. That is my truth. And so I speak my word, that each of us is aware of that. That what God is, I am. Each of us is. Each of us is. And so we stand in that spiritual truth. We have the will to stand in that, no matter what the appearance is, no matter what other people say, we stand in that spiritual truth and we affirm its absolute truth, while at the same time being open and meek enough to listen to Spirit to how to embody that truth, how to apply that truth in the particular circumstance and situation in which we are standing. We open to that. We let God be God through us. And that is all we have to do. We let God be God through us. We stand, keep our connection open, keep our awareness, keep our knowingness of the truth of who we are wide open. And then keep the listening wide open. And so in gratitude for each person who is saying yes to this process, in gratitude for the good that comes out of this process, that we each experience as a result of doing this, that as we bring our meekness and our will into harmony with each other, and are crowned by that righteous judgment of the divine that we already know, that our lives transform, that our lives take on the appearance of the nature of the divine more and more fully. And so in great gratitude for this truth, I release this word into a law that moves it into form, moves it into expression in the most beautiful and perfect ways possible in each of our lives right here, right now. And it does so. And so it is. Thank you.
To love, serve.